Welcome back to Aldia's Keep. In honor of Lucatiel, we are wearing the equipment she bequeathed to us, as well as her Mira Greatsword. I almost said Great Mira Sword, which would be different. Lucatiel's set. We're not wearing the mask because, you know, skulls. Excuse me. Anyway, Lucatiel's set is lightish to mediumish armor, offers fairly good protection for its weight, looks really nice. Is otherwise nothing particularly special. Doesn't have any special effects. The Mira Greatsword is a greatsword, except it scales off of dexterity. At this point in the game, that's not really anything worthwhile to note. Except that this greatsword actually has fairly reasonable stat requirements. Alastiel of Mira is presumably Lucatiel's brother. If he's been reduced to invading random folks, then he's probably fallen upon hard times. Certainly his swordsmanship was not quite as good as we were led to believe. For no other reason than as some sort of passive-aggressive fuck you to people who like to get drops, Alastiel of Mira has a very rare chance of dropping the old Mira Greatsword, which is completely identical to the sword that we're using except for the description. It seems that Aldia is keeping some strange house guests. All these bloodstains are making me nervous. Oh goodness. It's a fairly obvious trap, but I will admit my first time through the game I did get caught by it because I was sort of caught up in the spectacle. The bait is just a fading soul. Is that a fog door? No.
Please, just stay away. No, please, don't come near me. Nothing good will come of it. Just leave me alone, please. Leave this place and leave me be, as I'd not see any harm befall you. Please. 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 Just leave me alone.
Alright, bud, you got it. He seems to be sealed behind some kind of barrier. Now, one thing you might notice about these messages is that they don't have any ratings on them. That means these are hard-coded into the game. These are messages left by developers. And the developers really want me to pull back. So, you know, they made the game. They probably know better than me. Let's leave that switch alone. I'll go into a little bit more detail about the mysterious fellow behind the fog and that switch at a later date. Oh, hello. Oh, God. So, that's how the red lizards explode. It hurts. On one hand, I'm glad I caught that on camera. On the other hand, ow! little sub-area is interesting. These appear to be replicas, or maybe even prototypes, of the King's Mirror that the Mirror Knight used to summon the Black Phantoms in his boss fight. These mirrors can only summon one thing before they lose their potency. While if the fight goes long enough with the Mirror Knight, he can summon a whole army of dudes if you want. Hell yeah. Only 3 mirrors here actually have enemies in them, though each enemy is fairly challenging, so I would recommend that you take it slowly. You can also take advantage of the fact that they're quite vulnerable when they first pop out. If you time it right, you can backstab them fairly easily. They're not especially difficult to deal with, but they do have a lot of health. Like a lot of things at this point in the game. The Northern Ritual Band +2 gives more spell uses at the cost of lower HP totals. I've never really liked the ring very much because I like having a health bar, but I don't think it's bad per se. You just need to adjust your playstyle. The Mirror Greatsword has a fairly standard attack pattern, but it's actually quite strong. It's fairly quick for such a large weapon, and it's got both thrusting and slashing on it. Also, picking up an extra ring reminded me that I still have the King's Ring equipped, which is not honestly that good. It increases your pyromancy by a little bit, but I'd rather have something more pronounced, I guess. After some deliberation at my enormous collection of rings, I believe that I finally decided upon Flynn's ring, because I'm actually, for the first time in quite some time, wearing pretty light armor and a pretty light weapon, so I should get some pretty good mileage out of it. The direct path is blocked by this petrified ogre. Ow. It is not required to do this to proceed, but there is a reason to do so. Gratitude is not really part of the ogre's dictionary, so we still have to fight him. Pyromancy is a very effective tool. This also demonstrates the best way to fight ogres. Get behind them and bait them into doing that slow butt slam attack all the time. Doesn't even hurt that much, really. Our reward for unpetrifying the ogre is the Dragon Acolyte Mask. We are now an orb. Another one of the enormous basilisks from the Shaded Woods is here. briefly in a cage, though, so if we wanted to ignore it, then that would certainly be an option. However, much like the ogre, the large basilisk drops an item. A unique item at that, so our course is clear. Once we pick up excuse me. Once we pick up these bonfire ascetics, it's time to go to work. Sizing up my options here, I decide that the best thing to do is probably just use the great bow. Since I don't have much on me at the moment, the weight isn't even that big of a deal, so I can just equip it and my sword and be fine. This thing has a lot of health. Eventually you'll get its attention, but it has the same weakness as the other one. It isn't too keen on moving. It will spray its petrifying gas at you, but it doesn't have a lot of range, so you can just sort of sit on the periphery and poke him with arrows until he dies. Unless you're like me, in which case you get bored. Now there is something I want to show off here briefly if I can get him to... There we go. He can actually break through his cage, which sort of raises the question of how he got in there in the first place and why he hasn't busted out before now. Our reward is the Dragon Sage Hood, which is a lot like the Dragon Acolyte Mask. In fact, there's not a lot of difference between the two items. This one is slightly heavier, and now we are a shaggy orb. A rather ornate switch for such a mundane task. This Pharos' lockstone is completely optional, but I do find the extra lighting a little bit helpful. This hallway plays host to a great many different creatures, including the Dragon Acolytes. They tend to hide behind the portraits and honestly not do much of anything unless you knock them down. However, they can sometimes drop petrified dragon bones and a couple of other unique things, so it's worth it to kill them if you have the time. They're not particularly difficult foes. They don't have that much health. They're fairly slow. And if you get hit by their attacks, they don't do that much damage, I guess? I don't know. It's been forever since I actually got hit by one of those. It seems that great science has been occurring in this building. Indeed, all throughout the game, we have been finding various items that have mentioned Aldia's Keep as a place of, somewhat dubious report. Speaking of dubious, this bonfire is kind of an asshole. Unless you have either prior knowledge or a helpful helpful message in front of the secret door. You have no real reason to even look for this. I'm tired of being an orb. Let's go back to being a skull. I really, really like Fire Snake. I think it's probably one of the better pyromancies in the game. Unfortunately, it does have some limitations. We have seen before that it doesn't handle ledges very well, and it does have not very many uses, and it takes up 2 attunement slots. Fortunately, it serves our purposes just fine here, but it is regrettably not always the best choice. I hate it when there are items by doors. Speaking of items by doors, there are some in this corrosive goo pit, so we must do the needful. Equip some junk that we don't care about, and take a nice stroll through the goo. We somehow have 2 Mad Warrior masks, so I feel that's the most efficient option. Honestly, the most efficient option is going naked, but we have to have standards. The most important thing down here is the Aldia key, which will open up a couple extra doors in the area. The Soul Geyser and Petrified Dragon Bone are also nice finds. The Soul Geyser is probably the most powerful sorcery in the game. It requires a whopping, I think, like 65 or so intelligence to even attune. Well, not to attune, but to use. You can attune anything if you have the slots, you just can't use it if you don't have the stats. At any rate, it's extremely powerful, only has a couple uses, but if you get off a good hit with it, it can honestly take out some bosses in like 2 or 3 casts. If you're spec for it, it's pretty ridiculous. Now, for my favorite part of any situation where I have to go through corrosive stuff is remembering which rings I had equipped. That looks about right anyway. The old Leo ring is less useful with the greatsword, but it still has some thrust attacks we can use. With that somewhat grody interlude out of the way, we can continue on. The Dragon Acolytes do have a special ability in that they can toss magic flasks at you. It's about as threatening as it looks, but it's something to be aware of, I guess. I believe that the portraits will only reset themselves upon area transition. So if you do end up resting on the bonfire, it might be worth it to go back and make sure that all the dragon acolytes that you've uncovered are neutralized. I really like this area of the game. It's unique and a little bit unsettling. Oh, that's a nice find. Might show that off a bit later. The Aldia hammer. This is a bit bothersome. And it also shows off what I mean about some limitations to Fire Snake. It was honestly a bad situation all around for me because at that precise moment somebody came in to bother me. Which is kind of difficult when you're recording a video game for the internet, so sometimes your second dragon ring ends up breaking and it sucks, but sometimes you just have to deal with it. It would be nice if there was a more distinct visual indicator for when your stuff was breaking due to corrosive gas. Then again, it's honestly a pretty niche occurrence, so maybe it's not worth it. Either way, the best way to deal with this guy, like the one in the Shrine of Amana, is just to snipe him. If you go in with weapons blazing, you'll probably end up getting something broken. Then again, if you stand around and make silly emotes at him, you'll probably get something broken anyway. Coincidentally, that is one of the few barrels in the game that I think actually holds something in it. There's an ogre back there, so I'm going to try and find a different way around. Fighting those guys in close quarters is always a challenge. This door is hella locked. The Aldia key doesn't work, and given the amount of padlocks, I think we need an entire key ring to get it open. It's been a while since we've seen an enhanced undead. All the way back in Sinner's Rise. This guy does not have the strength necessary to break his cage, but that actually kind of works against us, because we do want to kill him. There is a reason why we want him out of the way, but as you might see, working around the fact that he's not always in easy reach can be difficult. He also has a magic clipping tail, so don't get any funny ideas. And sometimes it's just too difficult for the targeting system to handle poking your weapon through the bars. I see you back there. Oh, that's grisly. This is a quote-unquote alternate entrance to the goo pit. And, you know, I'm pretty sure those are or were giants of some description, so some pretty unsavory shit was gotten up to here. Also, that happens. They can just bust through the door. However, believe it or not, we can use this to our advantage. We can simply take advantage of the fact that ogres possess door-busting strength and use them to open the way. When you have a sufficiently large fist, you don't need a key. Of course, now we still need to deal with this guy, but it's not so difficult since we have some room to maneuver now. Fire Snake also has an advantage in that if the enemy is sufficiently large enough, it can actually hit multiple times, which can rack up some pretty big damage from a safe distance. Our reward for this puzzle is the malformed shell. A somewhat curious-looking great hammer. It's too large and heavy for us to effectively use at the moment, but it certainly looks interesting. There's another item that's similar to it, the dragon skull. I believe you can only get them by farming enhanced undead, if you're into that sort of thing. At any rate, this leads back to the room with a big corrosive bug, so Aldia's key doesn't really unlock anything but a couple of side areas, but it's still worth it to pick it up, I guess. I think I hear the fatty in question. This is a really mean trick, by the way. I mean, I know what's coming because I've been through this area, and I also had a little bit of warning from a friendly sign. But the first time you come through here, you're probably going to get gotten by that, and it hurts a lot. At least the other ogre had the decency to have a little slit above the door to see him, but in this case, he just straight up Kool-Aid Man's through. Wow, this is a change of scenery. Now, for the next boss, I'm actually going to equip a different weapon. And a different ring. Flame Quartz Ring +3 will come in handy here. The boss is also weak to lightning, so I'm going to equip my trusty Dragon Slayer Spear. There's also the fact to consider that the boss is a dragon, so it's apropos. So the Guardian Dragon is a pretty easy fight. However, there are a couple of annoying aspects to it that can make it take a long time. The most obvious one is that sometimes he will simply get up and fly away. He's no Sin the Slumbering Dragon, so there is that. But he can still prolong the fight quite a bit by simply flying to the other side of the room and breathing fire. The best way to dodge his aerial fire attacks are to simply stay under him and near him. You will usually not be able to breathe fire directly below. When he's on the ground, his weak spot is his ankle. Either one. Not necessarily because he takes more damage there, but simply because it's easy to hit, and it's a bit of a blind spot. Actually finding some quality time to hit his feet can be difficult, but he's far and away most open when he breathes fire on the ground, much like Sin was. Now, it can be a little bit difficult to dodge his aerial fire, so I do recommend some fire resistance. When he goes over to the opposite side and hangs onto the wall, that's actually fairly easy to dodge. You just sprint towards him. On the ground, he has a variety of swiping and biting attacks, as well as this stomp. The stomp is something you actually want him to perform quite a lot, because you can sort of get him into a loop where he just keeps stomping and not hitting you, because it's super easy to dodge and telegraphed. Like so. Turns out I actually beat that boss without taking a hit, so, go me. It seems that, along with giants, Aldia was keeping dragons in his house. Then again, that dragon was kind of a weakling. Raises some questions. We were able to beat Sin, narrowly, but I think that was mostly because he had a giant frickin' stone spear stuck in his chest. Had he not had that handicap, I'm not sure we would have been able to prevail. The Guardian Dragon seemed more like a drake than anything. A lesser variety. Though certainly still one capable of wreaking havoc, if anybody remembers a certain bridge in Dark Souls 1. There's also the consideration that most of the dragons are, fucking dead. I guess that's one more. Oh. Well, one guardian dragon was a weakling, but an entire army of them might be troublesome. This is the dragon area, probably one of the more visually impressive areas of the game, and also, what are you doing here?
Bearer of the curse, long have I awaited one such as you. One who might shatter the shackles of fate. One who can set me free. Bearer of the curse. It was my own manifestation that led you here. The ancient dragon has watched over the world for eons past. Take this. Do not resist. The dragon welcomes you.
Oh, that's good, because if he didn't, we'd be in trouble. The Emerald Herald also gives us the Aged Feather. This is an incredibly useful item that acts as an infinite reuse homeward bone. It is no coincidence that she gives it to you in the Dragon area, because its special properties will become very necessary. At least to pick up a couple of special items. However, we can worry about that next time. I think we need a bit of a break before we try and tackle an entire army of guardian dragons. Even if they do technically welcome us, I'm not so sure.